Equals Vienna, January 1939. The city glimmered beneath a pale winter sun, its streets whispering the language of fear. 10-year-old Ruth Klein clutched her mother's hand as men in brown uniforms marched past the Café Central. The smell of bread from a nearby bakery mixed cruelly with the ash in the air. Posters with swastikas fluttered on every corner. "Mama, why can't I go to school?" she asked. Her mother's voice trembled. "Because the world has changed, my darling." Inside their small apartment, the radio spoke only of decrees, of names erased from rolls, of families vanishing. Ruth's father, once a scholar, now stood silent by the window, staring at the Danube. Something had been decided in whispered meetings behind closed doors. Salvation would come by train, not by faith, and only for the children. The word Kindertransport was spoken like a fragile promise, one last act of hope in a city slipping into darkness. Night fell swiftly over the Klein apartment. Papers lay scattered across the table, forms stamped with British seals, each word a lifeline. Ruth's parents whispered in the kitchen, trying to sound brave. "She must go," her father said at last, his tone heavy with resignation. "England will take her. We will follow." But they both knew the borders were closing, the exits shrinking by the day. Ruth sat by her window, listening to the sound of boots echoing in the streets. She clutched her doll, whispering its name as if memory could keep her safe. In the morning, her mother penned a small name tag to her coat. Ruth Miriam Klein. Vienna. The train would leave on Sunday. There were to be no goodbyes at the platform, the officials warned. Too much emotion, they said, caused delays. Yet no authority could regulate the trembling in her mother's hands. The decision had been made. Childhood would end at the station. Sunday dawned gray over Vienna's Westbahnhof. Steam hissed and mingled with the cries of hundreds of children lined along the platform. Ruth held tightly to her mother's gloved hand. "You'll write me," she whispered. Her mother nodded, unable to speak. Policemen waved them forward, urging speed. A British volunteer knelt beside Ruth, adjusting her coat. "You're a brave girl," he said softly, his accent strange and kind. The whistle blew, a long, sorrowful cry over the crowd. Mothers called names, fathers reached through the smoke, and children pressed faces against the train windows. Ruth's mother touched the glass once, then stepped back into the fog. "Go live," she mouthed. As the train pulled away, Ruth's heart clenched with a pain she couldn't name. Behind her, Vienna blurred into memory, a city she might never see again. Ahead lay England, distance, and the uncertain kindness of strangers. The train rattled westward through a continent on edge. Ruth sat by the window, pressed between suitcases and sleeping children. Fields of frost rolled past, and at each border, soldiers boarded, checking papers, counting heads. The air inside the compartments thickened with fear and coal smoke. "They won't send us back, will they?" whispered a boy beside her. Ruth didn't answer. Outside, foreign voices called orders across the platforms. In Germany, the train halted for hours. Uniformed men inspected permits, indifferent to trembling hands. Then, finally, they waved them on. Somewhere beyond the Low Countries, the world brightened. The sound of accents shifted to softer tones. When they reached the Dutch coast, a volunteer in a Red Cross armband smiled and passed out oranges, the first taste of kindness in weeks. "England," someone murmured. The word sounded like salvation, though none of them yet knew what it would cost.
The sea was gray and endless. From the deck of a ferry at Hook of Holland, Ruth watched gulls circle above the waves. The wind carried salt and the scent of diesel. Around her, children clung to scarves and bundles, their eyes wide with exhaustion and hope. Across the water lay England, a name whispered like a prayer. An elderly chaplain moved among them, speaking gently, offering sweets. "Soon, little one, he said. "You'll see Dover's white cliffs." Hours later, when the creamy ridges rose from the mist, a collective murmur passed through the crowd. Ruth pressed her hands against the railing, heart pounding. Somewhere behind her lay the wreck of her old life, before her a future unformed. When the ferry docked, volunteers in British uniforms lined the pier. "Welcome to England," one called out. Ruth stepped ashore, shoes scraping on foreign stone, and felt both rescued and lost all at once. London, spring 1939. The Kindertransport arrivals were taken to Liverpool Street Station. Posters warned of war. Soldiers drilled in the squares. Ruth stood in line, clutching her small suitcase and documents tied in string. Her tag still read Vienna. A woman from the Refugee Children's Committee smiled. "You'll go to a foster home in Manchester, darling," she said. Ruth nodded, overwhelmed by the rhythm of English speech. The train north was quieter than the one from Vienna. No guards, no shouted orders, just raindrops squeaking the windows. Manchester greeted her with gray skies and factory chimneys, but there was warmth in the home of the Lewis family. Mr. Lewis, a tailor; Mrs. Lewis, a nurse with kind eyes. Her first night, Ruth lay awake listening to the unfamiliar tick of an English clock, tears sliding silently onto the pillow. She was safe, yes, but safety had never felt so lonely.
Weeks passed. Ruth learned new words, new habits, tea before supper, church bells on Sundays. Yet she waited each day for the post. Finally, in July, a letter arrived, the paper thin and trembling. Her mother's handwriting was careful but hurried. "We are proud of you. Be brave. Papa teaches children in secret now. The city is not the same." Ruth ran her fingers over the ink, imagining her parents' faces. She wrote back immediately, every line a bridge across the growing darkness. But letters took longer to come. Censorship spread like frost. By September, Germany invaded Poland, and the world erupted into war. Mail stopped. Her last letter was returned, stamped undeliverable. Ruth clutched it to her chest, whispering to herself in German, words that rusted on her tongue. The silence from Vienna was louder than any bomb could ever be.
By 1940, the air over England trembled with sirens. Ruth was 11 now, helping Mrs. Lewis tape windows before the air raids. Night after night, they huddled in the cellar as German bombers droned above Manchester. The Blitz had come. "Keep calm, dear," Mrs. Lewis murmured, holding her close as glass rattled overhead. Fire lit the streets, searchlights carved the sky. Ruth remembered Vienna's darkness and wondered if her parents were still alive. In the brief silences between raids, she stared at the stars, whispering fragments of childhood prayers. Though she was safe, the war had found a way to follow her, echoing across continents. The girl who once boarded a train in fear now stood amid a nation's courage. Britain was burning, but she would not run again.
When the war ended in 1945, street lamps glowed again. Ruth, now 16, walked among crowds, singing and dancing through Manchester's streets. Yet inside her, victory felt hollow. She had written again to Vienna, this time to no reply. The Relief Committee confirmed what she already suspected. Her parents' names appeared on no transport lists, only on records from a camp called Theresienstadt. She read the words as though they belonged to someone else. The world cheered peace, but Ruth stood alone in its noise, clutching the silver locket her mother had sewn into her dress years before. It opened with a click, a portrait of her parents, frozen in the past. "You kept me alive," she whispered. Around her, church bells rang for freedom, each peal both triumph and requiem.
Decades later, Ruth, now an old woman in London, stood in front of a memorial engraved with names of Kindertransport children. Around her, cameras clicked, and school children recited stories not unlike her own. She traced her fingertips over the cool stone and closed her eyes. The echo of the past was still there, the whistle of the train, her mother's last touch on cold glass. "We came here as children," she said quietly, "and we built lives out of memory." The crowd listened, the wind stirring the flags beside St. Pancras Station. In her heart, Ruth felt the weight of a promise fulfilled. Not just survival, but remembrance. For every child who boarded those trains, for every parent who stayed behind, the story endured. The Kindertransport was not only a rescue, it was a bridge across horror and humanity, carried in the hearts of those who never forgot.